All right, welcome everyone to our April meeting of TV Toastmasters. This will play during the month of May. The theme today is what if, so we're going to find out what if, or why not? I'd like to introduce our Toastmaster for today. He's a very experienced Toastmaster. He's an ATM bronze and a competent leader, Steve Ahrenholz. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. President, fellow Toastmasters, and to all our guests that are watching in this morning, welcome. Our word power for today is going to be presented by Carol Kormelink. Carol is an ATM bronze as well as a competent leader. Carol is going to give us the word of the day to enhance our vocabulary. We're also encouraged to use the word of the day throughout the conduct of our meeting. Carol?
Mr. Toastmaster, the word of the day is amorphous. I heard this the other day, didn't know how to spell it, had no clue what it meant, so I looked it up and that's a neat word. It means having no determinate form, of irregular shape, formless, shapeless, unorganized, and characteristic. Time is invisible. It's amorphous. So if you can use that as you're answering the table topics and find a way to put that into your speech, I have a little reminder up here, amorphous. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Carol. One of the things I've thought of while you were up here is a abuse of the term. It's not a romantic fuss, you know, amorphous.
Oh.
Enough of the groaners. Our next speaker will give us some levity to help us get our meeting underway. Rick Davis is a distinguished Toastmaster, and I would invite him up here to give us his joke. Rick?
Being a parent who's sending a kid off to college in the fall, I like the college jokes. A college student writes to his parents, "Dear Mom and Dad, I feel miserable because I have to keep writing for money. I feel ashamed and unhappy I have to ask for another 100. But every cell in my body rebels. I beg on bended knee that you forgive me, your son Marvin. P.S. I felt so terrible, I ran after the mailman who picked this up at the box in the corner. I wanted to take this letter and burn it. I prayed that I could get it back, but it was too late." A few days later, he received a letter from his father, and it said, "Your prayers have been answered. Your letter never arrived." Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Rick. That's pretty good. That means they're reading their mail without receiving it. Okay. Now we're to the part of our meeting which provides all Toastmasters with the opportunity to practice thinking on their feet. We refer to it as table topics. Some people are less fond of it. But the way the table topics works is we have a Tabletopics Master. Today we will have Nellye Bowen as our Tabletopics Master. Nellye has prepared a number of questions that she's going to ask, and then she will select a participant to respond. The amount of time that the individual will have to prepare will be the time it takes them to get from their seat to the lectern. We'll see how everyone does today. Nellye?
Mr. Toastmaster and members and our guests this morning, I'm sure all of us have had times where we wish we could be someone else. They live such glamorous, exciting lives, and ours can seem so run-of-the-mill sometimes. So, if you could be someone else for 1 year, live their life, who would you select? Bill Miller?
Thank you, Madam Tabletopics Master. I had thought about this. I thought about this before. In fact, I have sort of a running joke with my wife. I'm not going to pick a person. There are a lot of people I can think of, such as presidents of the United States or the Secretary General of the United Nations or a famous movie star. There are many, many people out there that I think we'd all like to just see how they live for a day or two or perhaps a year. I have a joke with my wife. I'm serious, but she's not. My great desire, if I could come back, we're not talking about reincarnation, but if I had to do something else, I would like to come back as a cat living at 111 Shelby Street in Frankfurt and be there because my wife is the greatest cat lover in the world. She absolutely loves cats. When she grew up on a farm in Paducah, they had 10, 12, 14 cats. Today, her mother still has about 15 to 20 running around, wild cats running out around the farm. But she loves cats, and she treats them with all the love and attention and respect that you could possibly give to an animal. Now, that may be a little bit of a different take than coming back as a human, but I think that it would be a very interesting situation to live with her and to participate in life at our home, and that is what I would like to do if I could come back. But there are many other people that I would like to emulate. As I mentioned before, there are folks who I think we'd like to live their lives and we'd like to participate in their activities on one day, but I'd like to just be a cat for one day. Madam Tabletopics Master.
Thank you. I can certainly relate to that. I have 3 cats, and I do everything they tell me. I get up in the morning when they want their breakfast, if it's in the middle of the night. They sleep with me. They own me. You don't own them. They definitely own you. Now, if you were a cat, where would you live? If you weren't Bill's cat, what cat would you be? And where would you live? And why? Whose cat would you want to be? Verna? Hope you're a cat lover.
Well, I like cats. I don't have a cat and I actually don't want a cat. But if I was to be a cat, I think I would probably want to be a cat of, like, the president, possibly. Now, I'm not sure if the president travels with a cat. I know the presidents always travel with their dogs, and I love to travel, so I think maybe if I was this cat, I would be such a special cat that I would then become the president's cat, and I would be on the news as this cat, and you'd see me walking down towards the helicopter or whatever to take off to Camp David or other exciting places in the world. I mean, obviously they would not take me to Afghanistan or something like that, but I think if I was the president's cat, they would love me and they would take me wherever they went, if they went to England or Australia or wherever it happened to be, and I think that would be so exciting. Maybe I'm going to decide to be a cat. I hadn't thought of that before, but okay, yeah, I think I want to be the president's cat, so I'm going to be the first cat. Thank you.
Thank you, Verna. Well, I think all cats that have owners who love them, they're all first cats. Now, the third question was going to be, would you know who or what you're going to be, what would you do every day? I mean, what would your life be like other than traveling with the president? What would your occupation be all day long? Other than sleeping? Because they sleep about half the time. Rick, how would you spend your day? What would your activities be?
Thank you, Madam Tabletopics Master. If I were a cat, if I were the president's cat, and I can't talk about sleeping because that's basically what cats do. About 18, 19 hours a day is sleep. The other time they spend grooming. Eating, yes. They do like to eat and use the litter box and all that kind of good stuff that cats do. Come to think of it, I don't think I'd want to be a cat. I think cats are pretty mellow. I guess in I don't know, a farm situation, at least get to go out and chase the field mice and jump after the birds. I doubt if they catch many, but so that seems like a more interesting life than being cooped up in the White House, even if the White House is a fairly large building. I think I would probably enjoy sort of going out and doing a little hunting and sort of being a little social with the local cats. And that's sort of, I guess, where they come up with tomcatting, you know. That sounds okay, but just being stuck in the White House, I don't know, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. Madam Tabletopics Master.
And Mr. Toastmaster?
Finished?
Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Nellye. Do you have ballots that you want people to complete here for best table topics?
No, we don't do that.
Okay. All right.
No, we don't do that.
Now we're to the part of our meeting where we will have an opportunity to hear a couple of prepared speeches. Our first speaker today brings an interesting background with him. Our first speaker is going to be Mr. Bill Miller. Upon retiring from the Kentucky Legislative Research Commission, Bill developed an international consulting firm. He is the past president of the Frankfurt Rotary Club and is the district governor nominee for the Kentucky Rotary District 6710. Bill moderates and produces 2 weekly internationally oriented TV programs titled Frankfurt's Global Connection and Louisville's Global Connection. Bill, who achieved his ATM Silver and the Competent Leader Award, is currently Toastmasters Southern Division Governor in District 40. He has served as an Area 44 Governor and the Frankfurt Capital City Club Membership and Public Relations Vice Presidents. Those are 2 roles he's had. The presentation that we're going to hear today from him is part of the Toastmasters Advanced Communication and Leadership Program. It comes out of the booklet Persuasive Speaking. There are a number of speech projects within that manual, and this one will focus on addressing the opposition. I need to set a little bit of background for you so that you know the context within which Bill is going to be giving his presentation. He has been invited to address 12 members of the U.S. House of Representatives who are very concerned about the direction of U.S. foreign policy, the increasing number of overseas programs conducted by the U.S. government, the war on terrorism, and the increasing involvement of the United Nations. We are to assume the role that we are 12 members of a congressional delegation, and we are to listen to and react to his speech. The title of Bill's speech is The United States' #1 Ally and Partner in Combating Terrorism. His objectives in giving this speech are to prepare a talk on a controversial topic that persuades an audience to accept or at least consider his proposal. The second objective is to construct the speech to appeal to an audience's logic and emotions. The speech will run 7 to 9 minutes, and there will be a period for questions at the end. I would like you to help me welcome Bill Miller to the lectern. Bill?
Thank you very much, Mr. Caucus Chairman, members of the caucus. It is truly an honor to be with you today to talk about a very, very serious topic, and not an amorphous topic. We're talking about very important issues when we talk about U.S. foreign policy. If we went out on the street and asked folks, say, who is our #1 ally around the world, most people say the British, probably, the Canadians, the Australians. These are folks who back us up in most cases. I would suggest to you also that we have another #1 ally as far as organizations go. Now, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is our #1 military ally. But we also have another one, and that is the United Nations. We often don't think of the United Nations as an organization that impacts our lives, but let me ask you a question. How many people have, as I ask these questions, a series of questions, just raise your hands. How many people have taken a cruise in the Caribbean or the Mediterranean, outside, off the limits of the United States? How many people have flown in aircraft in international airspace? How many people have mailed a letter to someone in London or in Mexico City? How many people have participated as Rotarians or Kiwanians or members of Lions clubs in the past? If you've done any of those, you have been the recipient of United Nations agencies' services that impact our lives every day. When we think of the United Nations, we usually think of peacekeeping, that blue-helmeted peacekeepers in very dangerous areas of the world. That's only 15% of the United Nations budget. That's a very important activity because when there are UN peacekeepers, that means a couple of things. One, U.S. troops are not on the front line. They're not in harm's way. Secondly, they are usually helping us because there are 16 UN peacekeeping missions right now that are out there operating, and our U.S. Defense Department is very interested and very concerned because we want to be supportive, but we normally do not provide troops to the UN peacekeeping missions, but we do provide financial assistance. So it's very beneficial for the United States. But you've got these other UN agencies that move aircraft and move ships and move mail and move weather information around the world. You have a situation where there are groups such as Rotary International that have teamed up with the United Nations World Health Organization, the UN Children's Fund, to eliminate polio by the year 2005. This is a major program. The Kiwanians around the world, the members of Lions clubs have teamed up on other projects. So you've got a lot of United Nations agencies that we hear very little about. In fact, we very seldom hear anything about these agencies. And they're very important to us because our businesses could not operate without these services. We as international travelers, the U.S. public, consist of 40% of the international flying public, international flying travelers. So we depend upon these services. I would, as just a point, I think as we look at the United Nations, it was formed in 1945. You think back during the Cold War, the United Nations was almost, it was paralyzed to some degree because the old Soviet Union and we would do things at the UN. We fought the Cold War at the United Nations. In fact, there was a lot of confusion at the UN. It reminds me of the story about Christopher Columbus, almost like an organization like Christopher Columbus, who left Spain. When he left Spain, he didn't know where he was going. When he got to the United States, he didn't know where he was, or he got to America. When he went home, he didn't know where he'd been. And that, I think, sums up to a large degree what the United Nations was during the Cold War, especially in the Security Council. But that has changed quite dramatically. Let's just focus for a moment on what's going on in Afghanistan. Here, the United States is leading the way. We've taken the lead militarily because we're the strongest military power in the world, and that's the way it should be. But the United Nations has been very supportive in fighting terrorism in particular and in Afghanistan in particular. If you look at what the UN did immediately after the horrible attack of 9/11, when we lost the World Trade Center and also the Pentagon, part of the Pentagon building, the UN Security Council issued 2 resolutions, one the next day and another one 2 weeks later. The one the next day said that the perpetrators should be brought to justice immediately, called upon all 189 countries in the UN to bring the perpetrators to justice. 2 weeks later, they came out with another resolution requiring that countries cut off funding to the Al-Qaeda and to other sources such as these terrorist cells. That was extremely significant because you've got to cut off the funding to these terrorist groups or they're going to continue. The UN has also been very involved in Afghanistan. For example, the World Food Program has helped over 3 million Afghans stay alive. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees has helped people in Afghanistan to maintain just a basic subsistence level so they can come back into their country when the fighting ceases. You have the World Health Organization that's trying to build a health infrastructure in Afghanistan. In the United States, we have about 1 doctor for every 250 people. In Afghanistan, it's 1 doctor for every 50,000 people, if you can imagine that. The UN Children's Fund has been very instrumental in helping develop maternal and child health care programs in Afghanistan. The UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, you think of them training teachers, they're also working with the media in Afghanistan, the media that were put out of business when the Taliban actually shut them down and drove them out of town, drove them out of Kabul. And they're working to help train journalists, to help them to develop the skills to develop a free press. The United Nations was very critical in bringing together the players, not selecting the leaders of Afghanistan, but bringing those players together so that they could develop a democratic process to reestablish their government. So these are all goals that are important to the people of Afghanistan, but they're goals that are important to us too in our U.S. foreign policy. So I would suggest to you that the United Nations is our #1 ally in the war against terrorism, and it is also extremely important to us in the United States because without the services of the UN, we could not maintain our high quality of life. We Americans depend upon the UN services more than any country in the world. When we think of the UN, we think of poverty, we think of agencies that are dealing with starving children or with refugees. That's part of it. But there's also another part of the UN that impacts our lives every day, directly impacts our lives. And so that's why I would suggest that if you would think about the United Nations as an organization, think of it objectively as an organization that does impact our lives, an organization that is important for us, but it's an organization that we need to look at. We need to, I think, be very, not critical, if you will, but we should evaluate the UN to see how well it is doing. 10 years ago, the UN did not do, 5 years ago, let's back up, 5 years ago, the UN was not nearly as effective as it is today. A large part of the change is due to Kofi Annan, the current Secretary General of the UN. He came in 5 years ago as Secretary General and said, this place does not function the way it should. It doesn't have a management culture within the organization. So he set about to change that, and he developed a lot of internal reforms that have improved the personnel situation, that's improved the overall effectiveness of the programs, and he has made a phenomenal difference at the United Nations. And of course, he was recognized not too long ago, this past December, for his efforts and the UN's efforts in promoting world peace, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize. So there are a lot of exciting things going on at the United Nations. We need to focus attention on the UN. We need to encourage the UN to do well what it does well. And the areas where it's weak, and there are areas where it's weak, it is not a perfect organization. We need to encourage it to do better. But when you get all 189, now 190 countries with Switzerland joining, virtually every country in the world is a member of the United Nations. You get them together, and there are going to be some problems. There are going to be conflicts, and there are going to be questions that need to be answered. But we must remember that the UN is our ally. It is very important to us, and if the United Nations did not exist today, we would have to create it tomorrow. There are some people who say, well, the UN is a one-world government. The UN is not. The 190 countries at the UN are sovereign states. They want to preserve their sovereignty. Some people say, well, the UN has a large standing army. The UN doesn't have one troop. There's not one troop. They will have countries that will volunteer to participate in UN missions. For example, the U.S. did participate in the Haitian mission because it was important to us. The Australians participated in the East Timorese mission. So, again, when we think of the UN, let's think of that broad organization. And as Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General of the UN, said, you have not done enough, you have never done enough, as long as there is more to do. There is more to do in dealing with international problems such as drug abuse, moving ships and aircraft safely. There's more to do in our own communities, and we need to look at the organizations that can help us. I appreciate you inviting me to be with you today, and I'd like to open it up for any questions, comments that you may have about the UN.
Mr. Miller, one of the questions I have concerns the use of American money, not necessarily in ways that Americans would like their tax money used, on missions that aren't politically aligned with the United States and some of the past UN missions that I'm concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the way that operates, that's a good question. The way it operates is that the Security Council has to authorize the missions. There are 15 members of the Security Council. There are 5 permanent members. The United States, the Russian Federation, the British, the French, and China are all involved. There are 5 permanent members. A permanent member has the ability to veto any resolution that comes before the UN Security Council. So the United States, in other words, we have the ultimate power, the ultimate authority to say if we do approve or disapprove of UN peacekeeping missions. As I mentioned before, there are 16 that are operating right now. They're going very well. if they weren't going very well, we'd be reading about them on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever it might be. But in general, the United States has been extremely supportive, and this consists of this administration, the Bush administration, and Clinton, on back to Bush and to Presidents Reagan and on back. We have been very supportive of UN peacekeeping missions because we realize, first off, it's cheaper to use UN peacekeepers whenever we can. Secondly, we keep American troops off the front lines. They're not in harm's way in most cases. So there have been, I'm trying to think of a mission that we did not approve of, because if we didn't, we would have vetoed that particular mission. Now, there have been other missions that have been NATO missions, such as in Kosovo right now, in Bosnia. That is a NATO mission. That's no longer a United Nations mission. That the UN could not effectively take care of Bosnia. They simply could not handle it because they were not trained to do it. They didn't have the personnel. They didn't have the equipment. And so NATO came in and took it over. But in all of the missions that I can think of, the U.S. has been very supportive and has even encouraged the UN to get involved in that. But that is something that we have an ultimate veto over, to answer your question. Yes.
Is there anything that they could do about the situation with Israel and the Palestinians?
They are right now. As a matter of fact, the UN Security Council there are several resolutions that apply to the Middle East, but one of the two, UN Resolution 242 and 338, which basically, this is the foundation of the peace proposal that has now been resurrected by Prince Abdul from Saudi Arabia. So this is a land for peace type of arrangement, and so the UN Security Council is very involved, but it's very quietly involved. Behind the scenes, you don't see it as far as being up there and being vocal, but the UN is very involved. And of course you have UN agencies operating in the Middle East, in Israel and in the Palestinian areas, the relief agencies and that type of thing, and agencies building the infrastructure, the UN Development Program, the UN Environment Program, and different ones like that. So the UN is very involved and is very concerned, and that's the purpose of the Security Council, to make sure, or at least try to defuse these problems around the world when there's a threat to peace and stability. And of course, that's a major function of that, and it's a major challenge. I believe that we've covered all the questions. I want to thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Mr. Caucus Chair.
Thank you, Bill. That was very good. Our next speaker is going to be presenting to us a presentation taken from the Communicating on Television manual. It will be project number 4, Press Conference. Carol Kormelink has her ATM in bronze and is also a competent leader. She's a member of Talk Toastmasters and is a charter member of that club. Officer roles that she has held have included Vice President of Membership, Vice President of Public Relations, Treasurer, Vice President of Education, and currently she is the Sergeant at Arms at her home club, which is Talk Toastmasters. She is also Area 57 Governor. I see down here that she's also a candidate for the Loop Division Governor. So we'll see in May how successful you are. Good luck to you. She also plans to be a lifetime member of Toastmasters. I've always known Carol to be a planner. The objectives of Mrs. Kormelink's project number 4, Communicating on Television, in this advanced manual project, are to understand the nature of a television press conference, to prepare for an adversarial confrontation on a controversial or sensitive issue, to employ appropriate preparation methods and strategies for communicating her organization's viewpoint, and to present and maintain a positive image on television, also known as retaining your cool. The time for this presentation is 4 to 6 minutes, and there will be 8 to 10 minutes allowed for questions. Help me welcome Carol Kormelink to the lectern. She's going to be speaking to us. The title of her presentation is District 40 Realignment for 2002 and 2003. District 40 Realignment for 2002-2003. Carol Kormelink.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. I have been asked to address the topic of realignment of clubs within District 40 of Toastmasters International, and it's not amorphous. It does have shape and form. District 40, of which we are a part, stretches north to Lima, Ohio, stretches east to West Virginia, south to Lexington, Kentucky, and west to the Ohio-Indiana border. This district today is represented by 6 divisions. We have a central division which takes in Columbus, Pickerington, Westerville, an eastern division, the clubs that are closer in the Columbus, Newark, and Canal Winchester area. The I-275 Loop Division, of which this club will be one, and those are clubs along the I-275 corridor, all the way from Batavia, Milford, Mount Washington, Mason, and the Northern Division, which are clubs around the Dayton area, the Southern Division, which is Frankfort, Kentucky, and Charleston, West Virginia, and the Western Division clubs, which are near the Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky area, the downtown Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky. Now, every year in January, the Realignment Committee, which is selected from past district governors, reviews the alignment of clubs within the district to better serve all clubs in the district. Our district has founded 9 new clubs this year while losing several clubs, and very carefully considers how best to realign clubs to balance and strengthen all clubs in all areas, in all divisions in District 40. And it's not an easy task when you're crunching numbers. International standards for a more effective and better organized district is 4 to 6 clubs per area and 4 to 5 areas per division. District 40, I mentioned, currently has 6 divisions instead of the recommended 5 divisions. Several years ago, the Southern Kentucky area wanted to have their own division, which they did, and it hasn't grown the way it was expected to grow, so they're recommending that it be absorbed by the Eastern and the Western divisions by moving the geographically closer clubs of West Virginia to the Eastern Division and moving the Lexington and the Frankfort clubs to the Western Division. This change should be mutually beneficial to the divisions, the areas, and the individual clubs. The realignment proposal is presented for discussion at the District 40 Executive Meeting in March, and then the proposal is voted on at the Spring Conference Business Meeting in May. All clubs in District 40 are represented either in person or by proxy vote. As Area 57 governor and losing a corporate club when the company was sold, I welcome the realignment of the Cincinnati Club from Area 38 to Area 57. The Eastern Division currently has 21 clubs, and with realignment will start the new year in July with 24 clubs in 5 areas. The Central Division currently has 23 clubs, and with realignment in July, we'll have 25 clubs in 5 areas. The I-275 Loop Division, which is what I'm a candidate as the governor, currently has 18 clubs, and with realignment will start July with 19 clubs in 4 areas. The Northern Division currently has 24 clubs, and with realignment will start in July with 19 clubs in 5 areas. The Western Division currently has 19 clubs, and with realignment will start in July with 27 clubs in 5 areas. And I'm sure that when they look at realignment next year, there will be changes. It is fluid, it is always flowing, and we go with the flow. And I'm excited about the proposed realignment, and will answer any questions you might have on the realignment process.
Madam Area Governor, as a Toastmaster, I really don't care so much about where clubs sit on alignments and things. What I'm concerned about is when I want to go to my area contest, when I want to go to my division contest, I don't want to have to drive for 2 hours in order to get there. And that's one of my concerns if I'm in the Southern Division, that I'm going to have to drive to Cincinnati in order to go to my division contest.
That is a concern of some of the people in the Southern Division, which is why they wanted to break away and have the area down there, but they didn't grow. And just because they're in the Western Division on the southernmost part of Cincinnati doesn't mean that the contest will be in Cincinnati. They may meet at a halfway point so that no one has to drive too much further than anyone else. And that happens. West Virginia is going to have to travel a little bit further than I would have to travel to my division contest.
And the other concern I have is that training, as it's conceived of now, seems to be only given a couple times a year in centralized places like Columbus and Dayton and Cincinnati, and this may even centralize things even more.
Are you saying that's good or bad?
I'm saying that's bad.
They're saying that's bad.
I don't want to have to drive 3 hours after work to go to training or whatever. Somebody living in West Virginia may have to drive to Columbus in order to be trained.
Right, and one of the presidents from the Speaking Clearly Batavia Club, they offer, if all 7 officers attend the training, they receive a $20 gift certificate. They're recognized that they've put forth this extraordinary effort. And several people in Batavia, even though they had trained in Cincinnati, did drive to Columbus because they weren't available that day. So it's a commitment, and you're willing. I've driven to Dayton, even though I attended training in Cincinnati. I've driven to Dayton because I wanted to be retrained. And so if you're willing to make the commitment, you have fun getting there. Yes.
Madam Area Governor, one of the things that I would like to know is what are the 2 or 3 items that really form the core of controversy as far as realigning these clubs?
From what I've heard so far, it's the distance traveled, as Rick brought out, and people do not like change. I'm a person that I'm just learning that change is necessary. It brings new energy to clubs when things are changed, and a club that may have been sort of a mediocre club, when they get into an area that is energetic, they're bringing in new members, they're exciting, that club seems to do better. Now, if what we've proposed this year and will be adopting at the May meeting, they will take a hard look at that next January again. This is not something that once it's been done, it's forever. It is looked at every year, and there's a lot of thought that goes into where a club should move. And if clubs have objected to being moved, they have addressed that and looked at the club's proposal to see whether or not that would be better for that club. And so some of the things that they proposed, they had the current clubs, then they had the changes and how it would look with all the proposed changes. So that was discussed in March, and several of those were moved from one area to another. And what they have now that will be voted on in May will carry through until next July in 2003.
Madam Area Governor?
Yes.
That is one of the main reasons that the Southern Division was amenable to being incorporated into the Western Division, because it will be reviewed later. And so that is a possibility that if we see that this is not working as well as we want it to or we'd like it to, we can bring it out. But one of our main challenges, even though we have some strong clubs in the Southern Division, one of the main challenges has been to get people to serve in leadership positions. So this will help alleviate that problem, I think.
Right. When you can't beat numbers, and when you walk into the room and there's 20 people there and they're enthusiastic, the meeting is just going to go better than if you have only 4 or 5 people and you don't have enough people to cover all the roles that they have. And this way, it should give more people to draw from and actually make all clubs better. They don't do this with the idea of weakening some clubs. The idea is to take weak clubs, put them in a stronger area to help build that club. And as Bill said, it will be addressed. If Southern Division says, hey, we don't like being in Western Division, or we don't like being in Eastern Division, and this needs to be readdressed, they will consider that next January when they do the realignment for 2003, 2004. If I have no more questions, I thank you for your attention, and be sure to, your club has a vote at the May District Conference. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, I volunteered to be our club's proxy for the May conference. And I was looking this morning to make sure that it was going to happen at a time that I would be available to attend. At this point, I think we'll have a moment of silence for the evaluators to complete their evaluation forms before we continue with the evaluation component of our meeting. Can you shut that off? Because I've got to finish writing up my evaluation.
Then you can put a minute. Please have Bill and Carol will write, please.
One of the objectives of Toastmasters is to provide a safe, nurturing environment for us to develop our speaking skills and our leadership abilities. One of the important components of a Toastmasters meeting is the evaluation component, where we will hear a number of evaluations presented to the speakers and the group that's participating. What this strives to do is provide feedback on what was done well as growth areas, things that the individual speakers may want to consider in order to enhance their future speaking efforts. I'm going to call up Verna Gibson, our general evaluator. She will introduce her evaluation team, and we will begin with the evaluation component of our meeting. Verna?
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. The job of the general evaluator is to evaluate everything that takes place during the meeting. As general evaluator, I am responsible for the evaluation team, which consists of the timer, grammarian, all-counter, and speech evaluators. Evaluation is meant to be a positive helping experience which preserves or enhances the self-esteem of the speaker. A positive evaluation will help people overcome weak habits and add power to good ones. At this time, I'm going to bring Rick Davis up. Rick Davis has done the evaluation for Bill Miller, so let's welcome Rick Davis.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator, fellow Toastmasters, and especially Bill. Our number one partner in terrorism, or counterterrorism, the United Nations. I enjoyed this speech. It was nicely laid out, a lot of facts. In fact, there were a lot of facts that probably I wasn't able to incorporate just because there were so many, but I enjoy a nice, logical, factual speech, and I really enjoyed this speech. You were very prepared. You gave us a little handout, a 2-page handout beforehand, so we had a chance to look that over. You had good eye contact, good vocal variety, very nice, very persuasive speech, I thought. You answered the questions that were posed to you in a very nice way. You clearly listened to what the question was, and you presented a factual, fact-based response. The only thought I had is that there are a couple things. One is that because you presented so many facts, it might have been nice to have had some sort of a flip chart or some sort of an overhead, something that would have allowed us to sort of capture these facts visually in addition to listening to them. The other thing that I thought would be really nice would be to have some sort of an emotional appeal, either using humor or maybe telling us about the numbers of children that aren't going to be affected by polio because the United Nations is out there with a Rotary Club, something like that. I think that would have really added to the speech, but I really enjoyed the fact-based, lay it out there, tell us what's going on, what the United Nations is doing, how it's helping us and impacting us. I thought that was a very good way of doing this. And I enjoyed the speech, and I look forward to future speeches. Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you, Rick. Great job. All right, our next evaluator is Steve Ahrenholz, and he is doing the evaluation for Carol Kormelink. So let's welcome Steve.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator, fellow Toastmasters, our guests at home, and Carol. Some of your objectives, as I had mentioned in the introduction, included preparation for an adversarial confrontation on a controversial or sensitive issue, employing appropriate preparation methods and strategies for communicating your organization's viewpoint, and to present and maintain a positive image on television. I thought you did a real good job of maintaining a positive image on television. All through your presentation, as well as during the questions, you engaged your audience by looking at them. You paused and waited for the individual posing the question to complete their question before you responded. You had good body movement and your gestures were appropriate. You seemed very comfortable up here as far as presenting the information on the realignment of clubs and areas within the district. There were a couple of things I would like to comment on that I found presented some challenges to me as far as following what you were all presenting. You were very knowledgeable about the topic. I had no doubt about that from the amount of information that you were presenting. But that presented me with a problem because I think that a little less detail and maybe a few good examples, just general examples, would have fostered my understanding, and I would have been able to pay a little more attention to that rather than trying to figure out what was going where when you were presenting the number of clubs and the number of areas within a division. So I found that to be a little bit distracting to me. One of the other things that I think would have been helpful, and it was reflected in my question to you, was what is the controversial issue? What are the sticking points? Why is this a contentious situation, at least for some of the groups that are affected by this whole process? And when Bill raised his question, it gave me a little more insight, as well as some of the issues that Rick raised, because travel is always a question. Doing things in the evening does present challenges to people. So I would have found that helpful too, if you would have just sort of acknowledged up front what the controversy is, and then of course you would have proceeded to refute it. And at the end, you could maybe restate what the controversy was, but end on a positive note with why the things that are going to be occurring are actually beneficial, and the fact that none of this is cast in concrete and there are opportunities to make adjustments as is needed. Overall, I must say, I think you had more than enough material here. You had mastered it very well. You were comfortable up here, even with the questions that were asked of you, and although